Greetings, friends, you're on the channel. War Reporter, and today we are going to discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on March 5, 2025. Let's start with the territory along the border. Today, some neutral cartographers have noted further advancement of Russian soldiers along the border. According to their data, in the course of military operations, the Russian army managed to expand the zone of control in the territory of the village of Avdiivka. By the end of March 5, at least half of the village was already under the firm control of Russian units. Next, we are moving towards Lebedeva. Information is coming in from various sources, including neutral, pro-Russian and some pro-Ukrainian sources. They confirm that in the course of the fighting, Russian units have managed to clear a small pocket between the settlements of Lebedeva and Nikolskoye. The sources claim that during the fighting over this territory, a small farm called Lakhnya came under control. It was for him there were active hostilities. Of the main points worth noting that if this information is indeed confirmed, Russian units, in all likelihood, managed to force the river Lakhnya and have already settled on the Ukrainian side. There are no official confirmations yet, we will wait. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has not confirmed this information today, but perhaps additional details will emerge in the near future. In general, we see that the Russian army is gradually coming close to the railroad and the main supply line that runs between the settlements of Malaya Lakhnya and Suja itself. Perhaps in the near future we should expect an intensification of fighting on this section of the front in order to encircle the AFU grouping located on the territory of Malaya Lakhnya. There is also information from the southern coverage of the Sujan outpost. According to various sources, over the past 24 hours the Russian army has managed to finally clear the village of Kurilovka. There is no geolocation data or other supporting information yet, but we are awaiting additional information. We are moving on to the North Kupyansk direction, from where a lot of important and interesting information is coming in. Today, pro-Ukrainian mapping services have noted activity just north of the village of Zaporizhia. I would like to remind you that a few weeks ago, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed in its report that this village had been cleared. This was a major advance by the Russian army, allowing them to cut the R-79 highway. It was the peak of the expansion of the bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of the Oskol River. However, apparently, after such a rapid success of the Russian army, the Ukrainian forces still managed to stabilize the front line. The Ukrainian side began to gradually conduct counterattacks in order to dislodge Russian units from this side of the Oskol River. However, all previous attempts to attack head-on in this direction were unsuccessful, as the Russian side could easily bring in ammunition, rotate, bring in reinforcements and, in general, successfully repel the AFU's drone strikes. Therefore, the Ukrainian side slightly changed its tactics. Instead of strikes towards western, in the area of March 2nd and 3rd, the Ukrainian army conducted a counterstrike from the central Kupyansk Oskol. The main objective of this strike was to get as close as possible to the village of Lyman 1. Already on March 2nd, 3 and 4, individual cartographers noted that the Ukrainian army had indeed managed to achieve certain successes in this area. The main objective of these counterattacks was to cut into the Russian army's defenses and, let's say, to reduce its logistical capabilities between the western and eastern banks of the Oskol River. Simultaneously with the strikes on the eastern bank of the Oskol River, counterattacks were conducted in the area of the western bank. Apparently, as a result of a series of these counterattacks, the Ukrainian side managed to slightly improve its position along the line of contact. Well, we will observe the development of the situation, as this is a priority goal for the Ukrainian armed forces, to cut a ledge on the Ukrainian side of the Oskol Bank. If the Russian side manages to gain a foothold and further expand the bridgehead, we can talk about the beginning of a more serious possible offensive to cover Kupyansk. Moving in the central Kupyansk direction towards Zaporizhia, some pro-Russian sources note the alignment of the front line in the southeast, more precisely, in the area of the settlement. Some cartographers emphasize this particular section of the front. In the South Kupyansk direction, perhaps the most important news for the past 24 hours. As you can see, the the map has undergone serious changes. Let's see how it looked yesterday. By the end of March 4th, most of these territories were considered as zones covered by the fog of war or disputed territories. However, already today, close to the morning of March 5th, objective control footage published by the Ukrainian side has appeared. They show operators of FPV drones of the Ukrainian armed forces conducting strikes against the forward positions of the Russian army along the network of strongholds. On the basis of this footage, we are making appropriate map adjustments. Also, some neutral cartographers clarify the situation on the perimeter around these same strongholds. Based on all of this, we can conclude that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to take control of at least 4 strongholds towards the town of Lyman itself during the fighting in the Lyman direction. Here we should pay attention to the following important point. According to open-source data, there are practically no strongholds in the fields between the settlements of Kolodizy, Zelenaya Dolina, Myrnaya, Stavki, Drobish, and Lyman itself. For what reason the Ukrainian armed forces have not erected defensive lines here remains an open question. However, in fact, the Russian side has taken the first and only line of defense towards Lyman. In all likelihood, the Russian side will complete the task by moving northward, after which it will move towards Lyman with a broad front. We assume that in the next few months a third battle for this settlement will begin, with access to Slavyansk from the northeast. Next we are moving towards Chasiv Yar, from where information is coming in about a slight advance of Russian soldiers in the central part of the settlement. However, there is still no geolocation that could confirm this information. There are no changes in the Toretsk direction. Some sources report that at the moment the Russian army is taking measures to stabilize the situation and clean up the areas where the AFU managed to break through over the past few days. The situation on the Pokrovsk section of the front is different from all other directions. It is here that the Ukrainian armed forces most often conduct counteroffensive operations, and quite effectively at that. The city of Pokrovsk is not only a serious barrier and obstacle, but also a powerful fortified area where the AFU can hide and concentrate large forces while remaining undetected. The short distance between Pokrovskoye and the forward positions of the Russian army allows the Ukrainian side to launch lightning strikes, which are sometimes difficult for Russian units to repel. All the more so because the defense here is being conducted on the ruins for which battles were fought several months ago. Let me remind you that since the beginning of December, the Ukrainian side has conducted a series of successful counterattacks in the Kotlino area. So far, Russian sources deny that the Ukrainian armed forces have regained control over Kotlino. However, the majority of pro-Ukrainian cartographers and experts note it as a zone of control of Ukrainian formations. During this period, the Ukrainian side also conducted a series of successful attacks towards Peskinoy. Repeatedly, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to cut the main supply routes in this area. However, according to the latest geolocation data, the village of Peskinoy is under the full control of the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, this does not mean that the situation here will remain unchanged. Already today there is information that for the first time the Ukrainian armed forces have launched a counterattack in the direction of the Shevchenko settlement. Some experts note that during the counterattack in this direction, the Ukrainian army also managed to gain a foothold on the northern outskirts. The last attack took place over the last 48 hours. Up to a battalion of infantry and several pieces of equipment were involved. Whether the Ukrainian armed forces have managed to gain a foothold is difficult to understand, but at least there are already alarm bells ringing. Let me remind you that there is an extremely high probability that in the near future, if the situation does not change dramatically, Ukrainian units will manage to cut the bulge successfully in Kotlino and then advance towards Peskinoy. In this case, the armed forces of the Russian Federation will have to retreat to more reliable defense lines and create, let's say, a kind of layer between Pokrovskoye itself and the forward positions. Also today, some cartographers, mostly of the pro-Ukrainian persuasion, note the restoration of full control over the village of Uspinovka. The fighting over this village began, I believe, back in November. As a result of 4 or 5 months of fighting, the Russian Federation armed forces were forced to retreat towards Dolina and Vasilievka. So far this information has no geolocation confirmation, but we will keep it in mind. Next we move to Bogaturskoye direction, from where we stopped receiving any news. Despite the fact that yesterday a unit of the 114th Brigade published footage of objective control over this settlement, the Russian Ministry of Defense has not yet confirmed this information. Now we move on to important news from the direction of the village of Privolnoye. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported in another bulletin that the Vostok group of forces managed to finally clear Privolnoye of Ukrainian formations in the course of fierce fighting. Ukrainian units were forced to retreat further to the northwest, towards Volyn Poly and Shevchenko. In the near future, an intensification of hostilities is expected on this section of the front as well. In recent days, the Zaporizhia direction has been activated quite powerfully. There is information about attempts of assault actions by the Russian army in the direction of Lobkovoy and Stepovoy settlements. Some cartographers also note that perhaps in the near future the Russian side will be able to reduce the distance to a minimum in the direction of the settlements of Sherbaki and Maly Sherbaki. We see that Russia's priority objective on this section of the front at this stage of the war is to cut into the AFU defense in order to divide the section into two separate bridgeheads. It will be easier for the Russian army to deal with them in the future. Massive drone strikes of the geranium type have been carried out on Odessa for 24 hours in a row. It is reported that the strikes are mainly targeting manufacturing facilities and possibly warehouses with weapons coming into Ukraine from the UK and France. Several warehouses were destroyed. The footage shows another explosion, which turned out to be quite powerful. That's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, give us your likes, and have a good day.